Stereotypes. They're like Skechers slip-ons. They're easy and convenient, which just means you're comfortable with looking stupid. Stereotypes can be explained through social identity theory. Social identity is a person's sense of who they are based on their group membership. This comes in three parts. First, we put things in categories, in groups and out groups. Now, an in group could be your classmates, while out groups could be every other student in your school. An in group could be soccer players, while an out group could be any other athlete. In this case, we're going to talk about black people. Second, there's identification. Individuals adopting the identity of the group they belong to. It's important to note that self-esteem will be bound to that group. Third, there's comparison. Comparing your group to other groups. For self-esteem, your group needs to be favorable to other groups. It's natural to place things in groups and categories, and there's positives for doing that. But we're going to focus on the negatives because that's where prejudice and discrimination come into play. The real definition of stereotypes is a fixed or overgeneralized belief about a particular group or class of people. There's this thing called a stereotype threat. It's when someone is at risk of confirming negative stereotypes. So this would lead a black man in America, such as myself, to hide some of my shortcomings because I don't want to be judged. So boys, since I show these videos to other people, I'm not going to talk about some of the things that I'm not good at because I'm not giving them material for black people jokes. Besides, they don't need to know that I can't swim. It's safe to say that each race, color, creed, or ethnic group has stereotypes about one another. But this is America, so we can figure out exactly where the harmful and hurtful stereotypes come from. These grossly exaggerated things about minorities come from the majority, those with power, the influential, white people. But this episode is about what happens when black people live by those standards, accept those stereotypes, and don't see ourselves favorably. So even though white people started this, they get a pass. For now. I'm sure I can come up with a lot of things they did, but we're gonna be alright. Now 5, a few months ago, you had to do a school report for Black History Month about a famous black person. You were assigned Sarah E. Good. She's credited as the first black person to obtain a patent. She would go on to invent the predecessor to the Murphy bed. Anyway, your mother, with the way her brain works, wanted you to do the assignment on a contemporary, modern black person because, as she puts it, black history is being made all the time. I agree. She recommended Donald Glover. I said you should do the report on Russell Wilson. It occurred to me, with the way my brain works, that what Donald Glover and Russell Wilson have in common is the black community not recognizing their blackness. They're not seen as black enough. This led me to reading more about Black Authenticity, which is also a book written by Marcia Sutherland. Now this is hard to define, but looking into research to better understand what it truly is, it often comes back to our collective image as black people versus hip hop. Now, one of the reasons why rap exploded in the late 70s and early 80s was because rappers are seen as the most realistic representation of black urban experience in America at that time. And as you will see, that still remains true. Now, the issue of not being black enough has happened to President Barack Obama, Will Smith, and Whitney Houston, just to name a few. Now, Whitney Houston's troubles were described by a documentary called Whitney, Can I Be Me? She was famously booed at the 1989 Soul Train Awards. This lack of acceptance into the black community bothered her until the day she died. Russell Wilson and Donald Glover handled this issue in two completely different ways. Russell Wilson acts like it's not even a thing, while Donald Glover acknowledges this in his music. Now, both of these guys have accomplished feats recently that makes you take notice of their race. Donald Glover, as Childish Gambino, became the first black person to win Grammys for the Record of the Year and Song of the Year in the same year. Russell Wilson is only the second black quarterback to win a Super Bowl, and he now has the largest contract in NFL history. Now, the issue of Russell Wilson's blackness first came up in an article written in 2015. His teammates supposedly said that he was not black enough and they didn't like him. Now, Russell Wilson himself downplayed it, saying, "Black enough? I don't even know what that means. I'm just an educated, well-spoken male." In addition to being a well-spoken male, Russell Wilson, who is biracial and who also grew up in Richmond, Virginia, also has this as his entourage, and this is his former spouse. I guess I can kind of see where the disconnect comes from. Since that first article, the issue of Russell Wilson's blackness continues to come up on social media. People argue about it all the time, but not as much as him being corny, which I guess is the opposite of being black. So no, he's not the coolest cucumber being turned into a pickle, but this all goes back to W.E.B. Du Bois's double consciousness. Of this, W.E.B. Du Bois says it is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. Dang! This was his explanation of the souls of black folks in America, the sensation of feeling as though your identity is divided into two separate parts, making it difficult or impossible to have one unified identity. With that in mind, Donald Glover was a YouTube star and a standout on the show Community. As Childish Gambino, he wrote a poem in 2014 called I Want to Be a White Rapper for Twitter. He also called himself a white rapper in Backpackers, and in Bonfire, he takes on the perception of others, telling himself that he talks white. Recently, he hosted Saturday Night Live, and during his monologue, he addressed his perception.
And if you're black, I made Atlanta and Redbone. A lot of black people in here.
Plus, he made the song This Is America, which is how he got his 2 Grammys, and the respect of black people everywhere. We feel like he's speaking for us. Now, Donald Glover shows that your perception can change. I mean, his music used to be seen as hipster hip-hop. So boys, it might be hard to realize that when you're black in America, you don't simply belong to yourself. Your success, struggles, and sacrifices reflect black people everywhere. Now, whether that's right or wrong, or good or bad, that apparently gets amplified when you're a celebrity, even more so when you're a rapper. Comedian and writer Baratunde states how his life does and does not fit the popular concept of blackness, a concept he describes here. So boys, I hope you realize that hip-hop is number 1 on the list and music talent is on there just further down. I agree with this list, so to the people who question how black someone is, how many of these things do you need to obtain before becoming authentically black? And should this be a checklist? Probably the most interesting thing about all of this is that Russell Wilson is married to R&B star Ciara. Russell Wilson is always compared to her ex, Future, who is a rapper. No one ever questions Future's blackness. Future makes music for guys who don't show affection to their girlfriends but put their arms around their boys when they're taking pictures. Rap, more than anything else, is so closely tied with blackness that rappers, more than say politicians, athletes, or even singers, are seen as the standard for all of us. Not rappers like Will Smith or Donald Glover, rappers like Future. Not only this, but the gangsta image nails it down even further. You know, the hyper-masculine, violent, gun-toting rappers with, in Future's case, a fake drug addiction. This hood fairy tale of a life is romanticized even though most of this is fake. So how is fakeness a part of black authenticity? Now, I don't want to make this episode about Future because he's just the example here. Russell Wilson didn't at all seem concerned when Future tweeted gun emojis pointing at football emojis. So yeah, Russell Wilson may be corny, but he can probably... Russell Wilson represents what I said in my Black Identity episode. His positives make him black. He has found a way to please himself, his wife, his kids, his parents, and his coaches. Trying to please both the black world and the white world instead of yourself, you'll end up truly pleasing neither. Perhaps the one true way not to be black is trying to limit how other people do it. Going back to double consciousness, we've accepted another race's standards that were placed on us. We should be the standard. Maybe the standard should be, why don't other things live up to blackness? Boys, because the two of you are very similar to me, your blackness will be called into question, like mine was and is. I'm not a celebrity, but we looked at celebrities today because how they respond is seen in the public eye. Whether you choose to acknowledge it like a Donald Glover or not respond to it like a Russell Wilson is up to you. Just know that you are black. You don't have to be a rapper in order to be authentically black. When you're being yourself, you're being black. Just don't be corny. Now go play.